Another day, another story. On May 21, 1979, thousands of members of San Francisco's predominantly gay Castro district community took to the streets to protest the lenient sentence received by Dan White for the murders of local politician and gay rights activist Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone. Their anger combined with the actions of police who arrived to quell the scene soon boiled over into rioting. The resulting violence affected San Francisco's LGBT community for decades to come. Welcome to Tavo Eminent Channel. Harvey Milk rose to prominence as a gay rights activist and became the first openly gay person elected to a public office in the state of California when he was elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in 1977. His murder, as well as that of Mayor Moscone, devastated not just the gay community, but the city as a whole. Dan White was a former member of the Board of Supervisors who had clashed with Milk during their time serving the city together. In November of 1978, White resigned from his post, but changed his mind and asked to be reinstated. Mayor Moscone denied the request with Milk lobbying against White's reappointment. On November 27, White entered City Hall through a basement window and shot both men to death in their offices. 6 months later, White was convicted, not of first-degree murder, but voluntary manslaughter. White's defense team had pointed to his diminished mental capacity and emotional state at the time of the murders, as indicated by the once health-conscious White consuming too much junk food, a ploy that became known as the Twinkie defense. The jury, predominantly white, Roman Catholic and heterosexual, bought into it, recommending the lesser charge, which led to a sentence of just 7 years and 8 months. When news of the verdict broke on the night of May 21, Cleve Jones, a close friend of Milk's who would eventually go on to become one of the creators of the AIDS quilt, spoke to a crowd of about 500 gatherers on Castro Street, and a peaceful march was quickly organized. By the time the crowd of protesters had made its second trip around the block, they were 1,500 strong. They then marched to City Hall, where their numbers expanded to an estimated 5,000. As the crowd grew, so did the anger. Police soon arrived to try to control the situation, but that only served to enrage the crowd more. The police had raised over $100,000 for White's defense. He was a former police officer, and many in the community believed the department had conspired to reduce White's charges and sentencing. Although ordered to simply hold the crowd back, many officers began attacking the protesters with nightsticks. Many had even taped over their badges, so as not to be identified. Chaos erupted, as the crowd fought with police and destroyed a dozen police vehicles, as well as parts of City Hall itself. After 3 hours, officers moved in to quell the rioting for good, using tear gas in the process, and the crowd dispersed. In all, 59 officers and 124 protesters were injured, with about 24 arrests made. Hours later, several police officers gathered on their own to raid the Castro neighborhood, vandalizing a local bar and assaulting patrons. They shouted anti-gay slurs at the victims, and eventually turned their attention to attacking anyone that happened to be out on Castro Street. After 2 hours, Police Chief Charles Gain was made aware of the rogue office's activities, and he made his way to the Castro to put a stop to it. No officers were reprimanded for the attacks, as officials were never able to determine who had ordered it, but the violence was finally over. The next day, on what would have been Milk's 49th birthday, 20,000 San Franciscans gathered to remember him. That October, more than 75,000 people marched for gay rights in Washington, D.C., and gay rights activists from around the country were inspired to continue their fight. In San Francisco, the riots led to a wave of political changes, as more and more LGBT politicians were elected over the next decades. LGBT presence on the police force also dramatically increased, and has continued to increase to this day. The White Night riots occurred in San Francisco on May 21, 1979. These riots were a reaction to the lenient sentencing of Dan White, a former city supervisor, for the assassinations of San Francisco Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk. White had been charged with first-degree murder but was convicted of voluntary manslaughter, receiving a relatively light sentence of 7 years and 8 months in prison. The verdict outraged the city's LGBTQ+ community and their supporters, who saw it as a miscarriage of justice. On the night of the sentencing, thousands of protesters gathered in the Castro district of San Francisco. Initially, The demonstration was peaceful, but it escalated into a riot. Protesters set police cars on fire, vandalized buildings, and clashed with the police. The White Night riots are significant because they represented a turning point in the LGBTQ+ rights movement. The anger and frustration over the lenient verdict galvanized the community, leading to increased political activism and solidarity. Harvey Milk, one of the victims of the assassinations, had been a prominent LGBTQ+ rights advocate, and his death further inspired the community to fight for their rights and visibility. The events of the White Night riots continue to be remembered as a symbol of the LGBTQ+ community's struggle for justice and equality. A night of solidarity. It was a chilly evening in San Francisco, and the Castro district buzzed with anticipation. The air was thick with tension as news of the lenient verdict for Dan White spread like wildfire. The LGBTQ+ community and their allies gathered in Harvey Milk Plaza, their faces illuminated by candlelight, their hearts heavy with grief and anger. Among the crowd was Alex, a young activist with fiery determination in their eyes. They had known Harvey Milk, admired his courage, and now felt an overwhelming responsibility to carry on his legacy. As the night descended into chaos, Alex found themselves at the forefront of the protests, chanting slogans and demanding justice. Amidst the chaos, Alex met Maya, a seasoned activist who had been fighting for LGBTQ+ rights for years. Maya's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the fervor of the crowd. She took Alex aside, her voice steady but filled with passion. "We must turn this anger into action," she said, her eyes searching Alex's for understanding. Inspired by Maya's words, Alex helped organize impromptu support groups throughout the night. They became a bridge between the older generation of activists, who had seen the struggles of the past, and the younger, more fiery members of the community. Together, they provided comfort to those who were hurting, reminding them that unity was their greatest strength. As the night wore on, amidst the chaos, a sense of solidarity emerged. The rioting began to subside, replaced by a collective determination to create lasting change. In the days following the riots, community meetings were held, strategies were devised, and alliances were forged. With Maya's guidance, Alex became a prominent voice in the movement. They organized peaceful protests, engaged with politicians, and tirelessly advocated for LGBTQ+ rights. The events of that fateful night served as a catalyst, propelling the community into a new era of activism and acceptance. Years later, as San Francisco celebrated the anniversary of the White Night riots, Alex stood on the stage in Harvey Milk Plaza. The crowd looked up with admiration and gratitude, recognizing the pivotal role they had played in shaping the future. In that moment, amidst the cheers and applause, Alex knew that the fight was far from over, but they also knew that as long as there were voices raised in unison, the LGBTQ+ community would continue to march forward, undeterred and unbroken. Voices in the night. In the heart of San Francisco, the night sky was ablaze with the glow of anger and frustration. The White Night riots had erupted, and the streets were filled with a sea of voices, each one shouting for justice. Among the crowd was Sarah, a young artist whose vibrant paintings mirrored the colors of the LGBTQ+ flag. Her brushstrokes had always spoken louder than her words, but that night, she found her voice in the collective outcry. As the chaos unfolded, Sarah's art supplies in tow, she began to sketch the faces of those around her. The pain etched into their expressions, the fire in their eyes. Every emotion was translated onto her canvas. Through her art, she captured the raw energy of the protest, turning the turmoil into something tangible, something beautiful. A few feet away, there was Michael, a high school teacher who had always believed in the power of education to bring change. His calm demeanor contrasted with the fervor of the crowd, and he found himself amidst a group of young LGBTQ+ students, their eyes wide with fear and determination. Michael gathered them close, shielding them from the violence, and began to speak of historical figures who had fought similar battles, who had turned adversity into triumph. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah's art and Michael's words began to weave a narrative of resilience. Sarah's impromptu art exhibition amidst the protest became a symbol of hope. As people gathered around her paintings, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. Michael, with his students at his side, transformed the protest into a living classroom, teaching history and courage in the face of adversity. The night wore on, and the rioting gradually subsided. In the quiet aftermath, the city found itself changed. Sarah's paintings were displayed in galleries, telling the story of that fateful night and the spirit of unity that had emerged. Michael's students, inspired by his teachings, organized awareness campaigns in their school, fostering understanding and acceptance. Years later, Sarah's paintings hung in museums, serving as a reminder of the power of art to capture the essence of a movement. Michael's former students had become advocates, politicians, and artists, each one contributing to a society that was more compassionate and inclusive. As the city remembered the White Night riots, they also celebrated the voices that had emerged from the darkness. Sarah continued to paint, her canvases now filled with stories of triumph and love. Michael's students, now grown, carried his teachings forward, ensuring that the lessons of that night were never forgotten. And in the quiet of the night, amidst the echoes of the past, the voices that had once cried out in anger now whispered a message of hope, reminding the world that even in the face of adversity, love would always prevail. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.